Hello and welcome to the SciFirst MovieTalk episode. So in this episode, I'm discussing Disney's 2022 musical fantasy comedy, Disenchanted, as directed by Adam Shankman, and indeed itself a sequel to the 2007 hit musical comedy, Enchanted. Coming some 15 years following the original, after being stuck in development limbo, this sequel sees most of the original cast return for yet another magically glittered outing. But is it anything to kind of get worked up into a song and dance about this time around? We now catch up with the characters from that first movie 10 years following the events of that outing, where Giselle, as played by Amy Adams, being from the animated fantasy land of Andalasia, inadvertently found herself in New York, where she met and fell in love with Robert, as played by Patrick Dempsey, and his daughter Morgan. As they find their family growing, Giselle and Robert find the hustle and bustle of life in New York too much to bear, and look to build themselves a home in a quaint place in the suburbs known as Monroeville, the closest thing, in looks at least, that Giselle could find to Andalasia. However, it turns out that suburban life may not all be the fairy tale ending Giselle was hoping it would be. And so, with the magic and enchantment of life wearing pretty thin, Giselle seizes an opportunity to bring the wonder back into her life. In wishing for her happily ever after, little could she have imagined the force she would bring down on Monroeville, its townsfolk, and indeed herself. After all, she is a stepmother. Let's just say things go terribly wrong, or terribly right, dependent on your point of view. So, for me, the first movie is a true treasure. Enchanted ticked a lot of boxes for me. Awesome cast, grand musical numbers, amazing animation, and most certainly a magically presented story. Not to mention the 1,000,001 Disney references thrown in around every corner. It was a safe bet that it was always going to be hard for any sequel to top the original. Isn't that always the case? But after hearing a sequel was in the works and that most of the original cast would actually be returning, I was certainly ready to be enchanted once more, regardless of the outcome. And that's kind of how I went into this experience, full of wide-eyed wonder, magic and hope. And so in that, was it close to the original? Well, no. And initially, as the premise of the film's kind of being set up, I must admit I was a bit disheartened. Or disenchanted, that's what I was going for. And I wasn't sure that they'd hit the right notes with this one going in. The setup felt kind of laborious, drawn out and off-key with what I'd really kind of had hoped for, giving the expectation of the original. Everything felt grey, lacklustre, and none of the songs really kind of resonated, with many feeling very strained and forced for the sake of being a song, for the most part. Put it this way, I was starting to feel a little bit depressed myself. Not quite the feeling I'd kind of hoped for, regardless of the direction the movie took its premise. I kind of knew it was going to go a bit off-key. We get it. Life's dull, monotonous, drab. So to have it kind of reiterated at every turn seemed like overkill in this instance. Couple this with the standout bout of tedious teenage angst, and it kind of sums up how this film kicks back in with its characters. Now, it was certainly heartwarming to see the cast return, and indeed they do return to form. No issues there. Everybody gives a good game. They all did an excellent job with what they had to work with. But that's the thing. There should have been more. But the dialogue, the interactions, was strained to the point that instead of feeling like the warm and welcoming reunion it should have been, what we ended up with felt like an awkward school reunion. Unfortunately, it feels like they've picked the characters up and just literally transplanted them 10 years later, with little sincere or believable development in between. I do like, however, the fact that this movie concentrates on what may happen after the happily ever after. It might not be wholly original, but having Giselle show a more twisted, darker streak was certainly a devilishly entertaining idea, and it was clear Adams was kind of having a kind of an awesome time with the role once again. That kind of fed quite well into the story. In fact, most of the returning cast deal the same. Dempsey looks as though he's having a blast as a knight in shining armour. Well, at least one who perseveres. And Idina Menzel and James Marsden, they return respectively as Nancy and Edward, who kind of pop in occasionally from time to time, forming, if but a thinly veiled kind of linchpin and connectivity between the two universes. Now, once we've got the more melancholy setup of the story out of the way, the film does kind of open up into a more fairy tale-esque storybook setting that did, I must admit, put a great big smile on my face. It was a clever tactic that could have worked in a more dramatic way, perhaps, but it started to feel like we were really kind of getting to get the treat we were promised as the magic kind of started. It might not have been quite as exhilarating as it probably could have been, but what we did get was quite a sweet opener filled with plenty of Disney nostalgia. In fact, we do get quite a few throwback to plenty of Disney classics, to be fair, hidden within the tapestry that there is. So that element certainly resonated and ticked a box. Disappointingly though, and I think for me personally, this is why the film missed a beat. None of the songs really seemed to resonate. Even when we got into the more show-stopping theatrics, the grand big band numbers, which visually I enjoyed, they all seemed lyrically to be quite thin on the ground, lacking substance, no material to kind of really work with, no real hook or melody that I could get behind. For the most part, I just simply kept repeating the main theme from the original in my head round and round as these songs were going on. And that is saying something, given that the songs were actually penned by Disney maestros Alan Menken and Stephen Schwartz, who had indeed also penned the numbers for the first film. Where did they go wrong? Overall, it is a nice movie, but missing some of the sparkle and the pacing of the original. It still had that kind of warm and fuzzy feeling by the end, but something just didn't feel like it was gelled together all that well. Its heart was certainly in the right place, but it doesn't seem to have the same spirit of adventure the original did. As it kind of warms up, it does open to becoming more of its own fairy tale, as it kind of replants characters to familiar roles with a delectably sinister twist. But was it enough? Sadly, the songs just didn't hit the spot for me, and in a movie like this, they do form a pretty big part of the experience as a whole. They just didn't feel quite as strong or symbolic as they could have been. But I must say, visually, I certainly enjoyed this lavish big band productions that they did put on. Once we'd kind of left that more dull and kind of greyed out setup of the first act. It might not be the experience you would expect given the first movie, and indeed those involved really, but it still becomes eventually a vibrant movie which brings its fairy tale to life with a few sweet and delightful moments. And whilst the magic may not be as strong, there are still plenty of endearing moments and Disney references to at least glean some enjoyment from this instalment. To be honest, I think this entry speaks to a completely different audience to that than the first, which isn't a bad thing, it isn't, but it certainly doesn't feel quite as universal as a result. And in that, I think audiences who may have enjoyed the style and the comedy of the first may struggle to resonate with this just a little. So, that brings me to the end of this episode. I do hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please do leave a like. Please do hit that subscribe button for more movie reviews, trailer reactions, and other movie-related content. Absolutely loved having you here at SciFirst MovieTalk, and definitely love to have you back. Most of all, just thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.